All right, so this is my conversation with Patrick Weninger. Patrick was a former case officer with the Central Intelligence Agency. He served from 2005 to 2020. His work involved the recruitment of foreign spies. In addition to that, Patrick was also serving in the U.S. military prior to his CIA career. And the best part about this episode is that Patrick is an NC State alum. Patrick, I'm so happy to have you on the show. Thank you for joining me.
You.
Yeah, so I wanted to, devote this episode to a few things about your early days in the agency and some of the things that you might be able to talk about um, from your career, and then perhaps a few things from when you left the agency and some of the perhaps
Sure.
the stories that might have unfolded post your agency years. But first, I did want to say to my audience here that our good friend Patrick is an NC State alum, so this is a very interesting sort of I guess episode where we might even explore a few things about your days at NC State. I think that might be interesting. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so Patrick, tell me more about why or how you found yourself getting involved with the CIA, because I reckon a lot of people perhaps have been sought after by the agency and some have applied. But what is your story? How did it
Yeah,
start?
it's a great question. No, great question, and Bill, and thank you for having me here today. Really an honor to be on your podcast and have a chance to meet with you. And obviously, any connection to NC State, I'm a big fan of, and always want to, as part of my give back, try to help that along. It's a great question. I think, early on, when I graduated NC State in 1991, I got commissioned in the Air Force. When I got commissioned, I went to intelligence school and I was, happy doing that. I was very loyal. I grew up in Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Mm.
My dad was a military officer, a Green Beret. So I kind of grew up with this sense of service before self that was kind of instilled in me at an early age. And I wanted to, give back, if you will, to my country. And, I thought it was strange when I first got to college. I thought everybody's dad was in the military or everybody's, but that wasn't the case. So you quickly find yourself in this group of people, like-minded, where, hey, they have a sense of service. Graduating out of the political science program at NC State, I got commissioned in the Air Force as an intelligence officer, and then went and did that for 8 years, and got to travel the world and kind of get exposed to a lot of different things, dealing with classified information, being involved in, the military side of intelligence, if you will. I was not a collector. I was an analyst and supporting the warfighter, if you will, the pilots, and making sure that they were aware of all the different types of threats and how to do countermeasures and things like that, making sure they understand the environments they're going into from a geopolitical standpoint. But later in my career in the Air Force, I got into the special operations community and the joint special operations community. So I found myself back at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, as a young captain, serving there. And that exposed me to those, the different specialized special mission units that are within the Joint Special Operations Command at the highest, most elite special operations units from the Army and the Navy. And you can figure out who they are. And you're working with them side by side, supporting their mission with intelligence. You kind of get a flavor of, you start, you start seeing there's a connection with the agency there. So that really was what exposed me to the agency. And then, over, basically a 1 year period, through um, some opportunity to work with the agency on some projects, a senior agency officer who was a legend, but I didn't realize it at the time, had done some really significant work for the agency. Um, and interestingly, later worked for me as a contractor when I was at the agency. Looked at me and said, "Hey, man, have you ever thought about applying for the agency?" And I was like, "To do what?" He was like, "To be a case officer." I'm like, what do they do? And he's like, they're the ones that go out and recruit people for a living. They work in the directorate of operations, and they're the ones stealing the secrets and doing all the things in the shadows. Because you got a good background and a good personality and you know some leadership skills, and I think you got what it takes. You should think about applying. Do you have a resume? And I said, no, I don't. I'm in the military. I don't have a resume. So I quickly put one together and got it to him, and one thing led to another. He ended up with somebody was able to get in to the organization. It's the
Wow.
director of operations.
Gosh. The during your time with the Joint Special Operations Command, um, when you encountered the people from different special operations unit, did you ever sense that there was like a sort of sense of humility, or there's a maybe a thing about them that doesn't make them look or feel like they're the elite unit of the U.S. military? Because I reckon most of the time they're so they're like they've got nothing to prove, so their demeanor and their behavior is not telling of the fact that they are actually tier 1 operators.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. It's like this balance of, you always hear of them called the quiet professionals, and they really are the best of the best.
Mm.
Uh, and I saw that firsthand when I was at JSOC, and I saw it firsthand working with them in the war zones in the Middle East,
Wow.
side by side. There's a reason why these people are elite. There's a reason why they go through a very difficult selection process to get to the upper echelons of the most elite units. Um, but at the same time, there's a character trait that they want,
Mm.
and that I think is not dissimilar from the agency. In addition to being, I say this with all humility, being, smart, willing to operate in the gray, not having all the information, willing to make decisions, having good judgment, is that, they're very brave people too, and they like, they are definitely putting country before self, country before family. Um, that sense of service before self at another level.
Mm.
So when you see that, and it's that in their DNA is that alpha personality also mixed in with it. It's a great combination, and is what differentiates us around the world, in those different places where they and us and we jointly have to do some of the things, some of the more difficult things that you don't hear about.
Mm.
But
And
there is that sense of humility, but there's also that sense of absolute professionalism and pride that you see that is a hallmark in their ranks.
oh yeah, what about Patrick? The traits that they found in you that were, I guess, necessary to be a successful case officer. What did you maybe discover about yourself, and what did they discover about you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, I remember going into the process, and it's a really challenging process to get selected. It is extremely selective.
Mm.
Imagine thousands and thousands of people, and they pick they're literally picking a handful, maybe a couple dozen, at any certain time to do this job because it's, you're living a double life. You're living a life undercover, um, where you're presenting yourself as one thing in the reality, you're a DO case officer, handling spies, recruiting spies, and doing all these things. So, like I mentioned, some of the traits that they were looking for were leadership. So I think the military gave me that gift of leadership as a young officer, where they put you in a position where you have to lead people. And I purposely didn't use the word manage. I used the word lead. There's a difference. They want people, as I mentioned, with judgment. Again, you're not going to have all the information. And when you're a case officer, you're working at night 99% of the time. You work by yourself when you're on the street. It's not like you're part of a team and you have to say, okay, I have this situation that presented itself. Okay, team, what should I do? What do you think? Okay, Susie, tell me what you think. Johnny, tell me what you think. Mike, tell me what you think. And then you kind of make a decision based on the feedback. You have none of that. You can't pick up the phone and call anybody because you're in the middle of an operational act. And you don't want to have a digital signature. It could blow your cover or blow your location, whatever, things like that. Those are things you have to consider. We call that tradecraft.
Mm.
So being able to make a decision when you by yourself late at night, um, where you don't have all the information, call that judgment. That's super important. I also think you have to have, in addition to leadership and judgment, is you have to be able to learn the tradecraft that they're teaching you, this art that we call tradecraft, and it has to make sense to you, and you have to know how to use it depending on which tool to use in your toolbox, which level of tradecraft based on the environment that you're working in. And some environments are more challenging than others. In some environments, you know, um, in a permissive environment where the local intelligence service isn't hunting you, for example, and the terrorists aren't hunting you,
Mm.
there's a level of tradecraft you could use and probably works pretty well. In a semi-permissive environment, where how maybe the host nation, you're not as welcome there because the politics have changed. Now the host nation is very suspect of Americans. And oh, by the way, there's a terrorist threat there, or there's a foreign intelligence threat there, or people trying to uncover who are the American spies working in the country. Let's uncover it. If you're a Russian, like let's uncover who the American spies are in the embassy and tell the host nation so they get them thrown out. Or if you're a terrorist, like let's figure out what better if we can kill some CIA guys. What a great story it is for us. What a win that is for terrorism, for the terrorist group. So again, being able to use your tradecraft in the environment you're in and understand that from A to Z is super important. And the last thing I'll say that is a trait that people need in addition to leadership, judgment, and tradecraft is really the sense of adventure. Like this, I tell people, when I speak, I speak to universities, I speak to national security classes, and again, my intent is one of the reasons I want to do this podcast also is to tell a little bit about my story, and not to say, oh, look at me, but more to say, look at me in a sense that if a guy from Fayetteville, North Carolina was able to do it, that went to NC State, you could do it.
Hmm.
But that last piece is you have to have a sense of adventure. If you're not prepared to go overseas and work and be separated from your family and your friends and live this type of life, which it's not a career, it's really a livelihood. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you're never really turn it off, no matter where you're at or what you're doing, because you're undercover and you're living this life. If you're not willing to do that, you want to stay in Washington, D.C. or live in, New York City or live in Kansas City, then this is it for you. And I'll tell people all the time, I was like, it's a great job, but it's not without sacrifice. It's very hard on families. It's very hard on marriages. But it's a fantastic job where as a young person, you can have tremendous impact in serving your country and protecting your country. But you can't do it sitting in a cubicle in Washington, D.C. You got to get out. And guess what? Not every job is in London and Paris. Like there's a lot of jobs in Islamabad, and it used to be Kabul and other places, or you pick, in Ghana in Africa. We have people all over the world. Yes, going to London and Paris and Rome are great, but that's not necessarily where the mission is,
Yeah.
right? There's definitely some mission there, but there's mission in a lot of other places too. So
Yeah.
those are the four main things I think you would need. And for whatever reason, they saw that in me. And I didn't fully see all of that in me. But then when you start realizing, like, okay, looking around the room, like I'm not the dumbest guy in the room. I can compete here, but it's a process. It's definitely a process.
Good Lord. How was that? How did it feel to keep that sort of life under wraps, especially if, assuming at that time you had maybe loved ones or those that you were very, very close with, but you had to keep things in the shadows, so to speak. Like you couldn't really tell these people. Like how did that? I'm sure that sort of weighed heavily on you.
I think it's hard because when, there are a few family members that are aware,
Hmm.
right? But your closest friends, you know, they're not aware. And, for me, that was hard. A lot of close friends that I had from NC State that are to this day still my closest friends Suddenly you're living nine time zones away in the Middle East. So when you have that break in geography, right? You're not co-located with your friends and your family. Then you're living this other life, and you don't want to. You almost feel guilty lying to people that are close to you. You know what I mean? Yes, it's your job to live the cover and present yourself as something you're not, but to the closest people you live with, at least in my case, yes, they know you, quote unquote, I worked for the State Department, but I didn't rub it in their face because I didn't want to like look like I was lying to them all the time. So that actually led to me distancing myself from them. So I didn't want to put myself in a position where I was continually lying to my friends, but that caused a separation in my friendships and with family members, so to speak. So you kind of lose some of yourself, if you will, in some of those relationships, and that makes it hard. And I think since I've retired, I've gone out of my way to go back to the people that were truly important to me and friends and family and try to build that tissue again, that connectivity.
Mhm.
Um, but there's no making up for it. It does it's hard. It's hard on friends and family. And and it's personally it's hard on it's hard on you too because yes, you have other friends and people that you end up getting to know as part of your work and that also work at the agency. But those core people that were with you when you were growing up, and your friends and family and college and military, they think you're doing one thing and you're doing something else.
Yeah.
Uh, But it leads to again, there's a sacrifice that family and friends it takes a hit. Those relationships do.
Mm. You know, Patrick, there's a retired officer that I've had on my show that maybe you've crossed paths with before. His name is Jim Lawler. I don't know if that name rings a bell, but
It does, yeah.
yeah, him and I recorded a couple of episodes together, and I think I remember in one of the conversations we had, we were talking about this when you're maybe telling your loved ones about what you really do, you sometimes have to feed them information, not all, but gradually, like a bit by bit, until, sort of the truth is revealed, so to speak. But it's never sort of revealing it all in one go. At least the
Absolutely.
stuff, yeah, at least the stuff that can be revealed. Um,
Correct.
and I think that might also apply to the concept of recruiting a foreign spy. You want to build that relationship first, and you want to ensure that they're comfortable with you, around you, and even when you break cover, they you wouldn't like maybe scare them away.
Yeah, I think that, that's I get the analogy you're making. But the relationship that you have with somebody that spot, assess, develop, and eventually recruit and handle, and then turn over to somebody else to handle is an extremely personal and intimate relationship in most cases, not in
Mm-hmm.
all cases, but in most cases. In any, you know, most case officers will say a version of this, at least in my view. Um, you are building trust with this person because if you think about it, somebody that is willing to take the risks that we're asking them to take, to steal secrets, whether it be from their government or from their terrorist network or you name it, those risks usually, if found out, result in death,
Mm-hmm.
right? For them, potentially their family. So when they are doing this to protect the United States government and our country, they're doing it knowing they could die. So if you're handling that person, think about the trust and the faith you want that agent to have in you as a case officer so that they will do the things that they said they would do. Um, it's there's a long process there. Human takes time. Human intelligence takes time, and that time is to build that relationship, to vet the source, is this person who they say they are? Do they have access to the sensitive information they claim they do?
Mm.
Like, so how we determine that and how we figure that out, there's a process for that. Are they, do they have the suitability to be recruited? In other words, can this person keep a secret? Can this person live a normal life knowing that they're betraying their government and risking their lives and the livelihood of their family to make money or for whatever their ideological cause is? It's not always for money, by the way. That's a misconception. So are they suitable? Do they have the mindset to do this? So think about that.
Mm.
You know, say you have somebody working for you and you're paying them, they give you a significant piece of information, you pay them a big chunk of money. Do you trust that, hey, on their government salary, are they going to go buy a new Cadillac and a fur coat for his wife? What did you just do? You just highlighted yourself.
Yeah.
Can you trust that they're not going to do that?
Mm.
So it's a lot of things, but it is an extremely personal and intimate relationship
Yeah.
that um, plays out in many different ways.
Gosh.
Many different ways.
Is there perhaps a story from your missions that might apply to someone you've assessed and you've realized that they, of course, you can't obviously reveal the identity or where it happened, but perhaps maybe we can highlight some of the process that you had to undergo to determine that this person is capable.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I think we
Yeah,
can
you're
move forward.
constantly assessing somebody. You're constantly assessing someone and trying to vet someone. Um, I've been in places on one extreme where it was really difficult to do that, where there was a friends and family network
Mm.
where, you had one guy on the books and, any piece of information he couldn't figure out, he would bring in his cousin. But the cousin suddenly knew, had this information, but you got to pay the cousin too. And then and you can imagine what the types of places those are.
Yeah.
And it's more challenging to vet. But you have these friends and family networks that start coming in, and you can see it. You don't, it's not rocket surgery. You can kind of see it when it's happening. Um, but other places, as far as um, you know, people have different reasons for wanting to do this.
Yeah.
Again, it's not just financial. There's ideological reasons. Um, there's also provocations, right? The host nation intelligence service also is going to run people at you to try to identify who the CI officers are,
Mm.
right? Hey, there's every embassy has what's called, and this is not a classified top, a walk-in program run by the security office, where somebody shows up at the embassy, knocks on the door and says, "My name is so and so. I want to talk to a security officer."
Huh.
And they let them in, they have their identification. You try to vet who the person is, and somebody's going to sit down, somebody from that embassy, I'm not going to say who, which agency, somebody from that embassy is going to sit down and talk to him, say, "What do you want to talk about, buddy?" And they might say, "You know what? I work in this office and I have this great access to the leadership of my country. And here's a document that, boom, tells you their plans and intentions. And I want to work for you and I want $10,000 for this." How do you
Wow.
vet that? Is that a provocation? Because then they just say, "I want to meet the CI officer.
Yeah.
And I got to go. I can't meet you right now. We need to meet tomorrow. Meet me downtown. Meet me at this location." They want to control the location. Like there's different things. Think about it.
Yeah.
So is that a provocation? How do you vet that? So you have to make, again, this is where the ambiguity comes in. You have a lot of ambiguity. You got to make tough decisions. And, um, it's not always easy,
Mm.
but you're always assessing and trying to test and vet people. Again, to what I just said a few minutes ago, are they who they say they are? Do they have the access they claim? And what are their motivations? And why are they doing this? Why are you talking to me today? What's your story? What do you want to talk? Why are you coming to me? I didn't come to you. You came to me. What do you want to talk to me? Why? What's behind this? Um, so the emotional intelligence, that's another thing when you talk about characteristics we look for in people to do this job is to have emotional intelligence. So are you able to relate to people and understand people? And sometimes that's gut feeling on people. Do you believe this person? Are no matter how believable somebody is, they could still be lying. Are you able to suss that out? So it's an interesting, it's an interesting job. I'll tell you that in many ways.
I remember Jim saying something, Jim Lawler, about in one of the recruitments where you have to obviously put the person that you recruited on a polygraph test, and one of the things, the questions that were he shared on the podcast is sort of touches on the latter example you gave about someone walking in and you're trying to assess if they were pushed by someone to do this. And the question that is being asked is, did somebody ask you to come to us? Something to that effect, right? Did somebody, and the answer has to be obviously a yes or no. It shouldn't be in between. So,
Did somebody direct you at us? Yeah.
right, right. So I think in a lot of cases, you know, people want to figure out who the officer is, who the CIA officer is, so
Right.
they're
Right.
directed to, by someone
Like that.
else. They're being handled by someone else.
Yeah. Who's going to come out and meet me? Like, give me your best sensitive location to do a sensitive meeting. Then they can set up on it. You know what I mean? Like there's different things that services do. So they call it the great game for a reason.
Yeah.
Um, but it's a challenge, and you're constantly assessing the people that are sitting in front of you. Even if they've been recruited, you're still assessing. What if their access changes? What if you recruit somebody and they've been on your books for 5 years and the best asset, the best agent, they're giving you the greatest information, and one day they come in and they're like, and their information seems off, and you're like, hey, what's going on? Their personality seems off. Oh, everything's fine. Just having some problems at home with the wife. Really? Is that all that's going on? Turns out they got discovered. And the service went to him, said, either we're going to kill you unless you tell us what's going on. We're going to push you back in, tell us everything about the CIA officer, what's their trade craft, what's their meeting sites, all this stuff. So that's the other thing. What if sometimes people lose access, but they
Mm,
still try to present they have access? How do you figure that out to make sure? How do you know they weren't compromised? Or how do you
right.
know they just didn't lose their job, but they're sticking around to get that paycheck from you? It's not just at the recruitment or at the upfront when you're first assessing. You're continually assessing and evaluating the person sitting in front of you, no matter who
Mm.
it is.
Does that, Patrick, automatically gets shut down when you're not on a mission? Like when in your personal relationships, like do you how does that work essentially? Like do you have to shut that down when you're talking to
Yeah.
people that you're not essentially trying to recruit, but you're maybe trying to build a relationship with, for the purpose of a friendship or a companionship? Like is that
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's a great question. So like we have this saying in the building, don't case officer a case officer. So, right? So don't use it. Like don't do it to each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And people, tend to stick by that. Um, in your personal life, like again, it's a livelihood that's part of your DNA, and it's like there's some some I don't want to say hard skills or soft skills that you're taught that are really good that they can also help you in certain situations. But yeah, in your personal relationship, you try not to use it. You try not to, you know, identify people's motivations and vulnerabilities so that you can exploit it. Yeah, you try not to do that in your personal life. Everybody's different. I don't. But yeah, it's a valuable set of tools that if you do for 21 years like I did, it's just part of your life, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, there is some, You don't case officer your case officer friends. You know what I mean? Like, come on. But it's a great question. I don't think anybody's asked me that before. That's a
Oh
great
gosh,
question.
yeah. Because I reckon it's hard when you're always on, like when your senses are always dialed in, and you know you're leading
Yeah,
this life, and you're trying so hard perhaps to let it not dominate or infiltrate. Like you compartmentalize. And this is something that I think a lot of my guests have talked about. Like you have to be able to
yes,
compartmentalize. And that I think is not necessarily a trait that can be found in all human beings, you
right.
know? So that I
Yeah, I
think,
mean, there's a, that is, you become a master of compartmentalization and kind of a master of risk management in the moment.
mm,
And you're always assessing. Like you're working in a country undercover, right? Faraway country. Abdullah, you're working there. And it's been a long year. You're finally getting your first break, your first week vacation. The station chief says, Abdullah, we're gonna let you go home. You're like, I'm not gonna go home. I'm gonna go to Ibiza. I'm gonna go have a good time. And you get on that plane leaving whatever faraway nation you're in. Say it's in a third world, dicey country. There's a big CI threat from the Foreign Intelligence Service, maybe CT threat. Suddenly there's on the plane seat next to you, there's a guy sitting next to you. Suddenly he's really chatty, chatting you up. Hey, what's going on? You speak the language really good for an American. What do you do here? Yada yada yada, talking you up. Hey, let's stay connected when you get back. Let's get a coffee when you get back. This is a provocation. I don't know.
yeah.
But maybe it's just a friendly guy sitting next to you. But my point is your senses are always up because of the nature of your work. It could
Mm.
just be a friendly guy sitting next to you. Conversely, your senses are always up because of your job. So you're like, hey, where do you work? Oh, you're the chief of staff to the prime minister? Yeah, let's definitely get a cup of coffee when we get back. You see what I'm saying? It
That's
goes
your
both
golden
ways.
ticket. Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So your senses are always up from a defensive standpoint, but your senses are always up from like you're a meat eater. Like who is sitting next to me? Let me find out let me flip it on that. What
Right.
do you do? So it's an interesting world, man. I hope that was a good example.
That was a great example. No, because you never know, right? Like, who is this person that's sitting
Right.
next to me, or who's this
Is it a
person?
provocation? Yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe like, hey, I just connected with this guy and he has access to secrets and classified information that is of interest to me and my government.
Right.
You're
Yeah.
damn right I'm gonna give you a coffee when we get back.
More than just the coffee sometimes.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
know.
But it's interesting that this is. I think I asked that question to someone else I had on the show, where whether or not at some point you are so focused on this target, and then you realize that the one that you're overlooking is the one that has the access that you desire. And sometimes it's like, ah, man, I wish I sort of put my money on that guy, you know. And that sometimes I think you never know, you know.
Well, I think, you know, these things have a way of kind of working themselves out.
Mm.
And maybe you don't have a connection with everybody. Like, here's the other thing. I think to be a good case officer, you got to be likable. You can't be an asshole. Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm
no, you're
having to
good.
come sit the podcast.
This is a
But
very unfiltered.
why would if you're gonna be the agent and you're ready to commit treason and risk your life, right? And the livelihood of your family, like we were talking about earlier, are you gonna trust a person who's an arrogant asshole and a prick? Are you gonna put your life into that person's hands that's arrogant and obnoxious and mean and talks down to you?
That's very
No.
hard. Yeah, you probably wouldn't do
Yeah, you're
that.
not.
Yeah.
You're not. Believe me, you're not.
Yeah.
So whether it's the real you or not, at least in the moment with the people you're talking to, you have to have a personality. You have to be likable
Mm.
or to relate to people. If you're not, and that's where that what I was talking about, your EQ, your emotional intelligence has to be high so that you can figure out how to relate to people in the moment.
Mhm. Empathy, would that capture what you're,
Part of it, I think
yeah.
that's one aspect of it for sure, empathy.
Mm,
But it's not just empathy. There's other things that, like if I'm going to risk my life, do all that, is this person professional? Do they take it serious? Because think about it.
yeah.
Um, I have a friend of mine that tells this story who's also a case officer that he had an agent tell him once, like, Mark, I'm glad you get to go home and sleep well and see your wife and kids. He's like, but you know, when you're sleeping, you better be thinking about me because I'm risking my life for you.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like any moment, my life could be up like that, and I'm constantly thinking about that. So I want you to be thinking the same way. And the agent was right, you
Mm,
know. Um, so it's an interesting job, man, where you get to have this connection with people on a way different level that
gosh.
yeah.
And do you sort of maybe you get that question a lot, but do you miss being on the inside and
It's the people,
the
yeah.
people? Uh,
Like it's a fishbowl in a sense, both good and bad. Like it's a very small group of people that actually do this, and you kind of grow up together. You have great mentors, and you learn the job, and you learn the business of doing it, and you get to serve all over the world, doing crazy stuff, serving your country, protecting your country. Um, so it becomes a part of you,
mm,
but at the same time, you can't let it define you.
right.
Um, and that's where there are things more important than this, and you learn that at least in my case, you're charging, so like, post 9/11, like the mission was, the CT mission was, okay, Pat, you're going to the Middle East, you're going to spend a lot of time there. We got to get bad guys before they get us. And it becomes this mantra, this mission, and hey, we saw what happened on 9/11. And that was a massive black eye for the intelligence community, the agency, the bureau. We failed our country. It changed, it was a watershed moment in our history, and it changed the way that we live. You didn't have to take off your shoes. There was no TSA. You could just walk through an airport.
Right.
And, there wasn't,
No
there
random
wasn't this,
security check.
right. There wasn't random security checks. There wasn't, hey, you're on this list, this do not fly list because you're a suspect terrorist now. It was a different time.
Mm,
You could walk on a plane with scissors or a knife. Nobody cared.
yeah.
And then suddenly, 9/11 changed everything. And you're kind of thrust into this environment where, hey, you're now on the front lines, charged with this mission of protecting our country. You can't have another attack on the homeland.
Right.
So, the people took that very seriously. And it's something, I'm very proud of to have been a part of. We always say that, there was the previous generations in the intelligence community had the Cold War. Well, we had, the war on terror. And, here 20, 4 years later, our country's safe. And, Al Qaeda and a lot of the affiliates around the world have been destroyed, and they don't have the capability. They might have some capability to do some regional stuff, but the capability that they had back then to do over the horizon and sophisticated plans and attacks, they don't have anymore. Yeah, are there lone wolves and one-offs? Yeah, that's hard. If somebody gets um, radicalized because they're watching TV sitting in their garage, there's nothing you can do about that. But Al Qaeda and Al Qaeda leadership as we know it is done. Um, and that's a good thing for this world, not just for the United States, but for the world. So, you get this great sense of pride of having been involved in that. And when you're in it, you can't talk about it. So it's this weird, we're living in this weird world where
Right.
nobody knows about your successes, but everybody knows about your failures, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then, this what the media is saying about the age, and you can't say anything because you're undercover as a State Department officer, or as a, this officer, or military, or this or that, different. And there's this warped perception in the media that, the agency's a rogue organization, or conversely, it's risk averse.
Mm.
And I can tell you we're neither. It's actually a really good organization, an honorable place to serve, with good people, smart people that are making a lot less money than most people in the private sector, but are doing it for, you know, bigger intentions, putting, again, service before self.
Yeah.
And that's an honorable thing.
And how how difficult was it for you to grapple with the new reality of no longer being able to serve your country in a similar way you did when you were in the agency?
I'm actually good with it. It's like, because there's going to be a letdown when you leave the organization. Like, you're going to leave your friends. Suddenly you're on all these cool missions and operations you're involved with, and then one day you're out.
Mm.
So there's going to be a letdown, and hey, I was somebody in that organization. Um, but in exchange for that, you get, to be a father,
Mm.
full time, or you get to be present. You're not flying off someplace overseas and you can't tell anybody where you're going or what you're doing. And you get, you know, um, you get your time back in your life. And in many cases, you get financial freedom. You get the chance to get out and make more money in the private sector, perhaps. You get freedom of geography. I can live wherever I want to live. I can go do whatever I want to do. So there's, I can be present, for my kids now, where maybe I wasn't before. So there's trade-offs. Um, but it's a personal issue for people. And, for me, that trade-off I'm good with. I had a good run. Don't get me wrong. I had a fantastic run. Feel very proud about it. Had some great opportunity. Met a lot of great people. Did a lot of great things. But again, not without sacrifice, not without challenges. Felt honored and privileged to be in the organization. But at the same time, I left on my terms. It was time to go and do something else, and
Mm.
I had other things in life that I wanted to achieve.
Yeah. But you still, even when we communicated with one another, you still indicated you travel. There's the
Yeah.
element of, traveling overseas hasn't been entirely perhaps removed from your life, but maybe you have agency over when and where you want to travel. I think the difference here is that you have the choice, technically
Right.
speaking. Yeah.
Yeah. Do.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing, but again, everybody's different. I have some people that they were in for 35 years, and um, they left and they regret the day they left, and all they want to do is go back. Um, But I understand that. I mean, the building, we call it the building. The place has a funny way of tugging on you. I felt that way too for a little bit after I retired. I'm like, man, did I make the wrong decision? And then a year later, I was like, man, I want to go back. And it tugs on you. But it's not, imagine doing something for your majority of your adult life, and then one day you're not doing it. And when you're out, you're out. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like, there's no, due to the nature of the work, the security, the sensitivity, you're out, you're out.
Mm.
And that's the way it should be, right? You don't have a need to know anymore. You're not involved.
Yeah. You go out and do something else. That's the
You
way
go
of
out and do
life.
something else. That's
Uh,
right.
well,
I go to more football games this year. Go see the pack play. I give more freedom of time.
man, yeah, maybe we run into each other during one of those games.
Yeah, that's right. I was here in DC. I was actually to go see last year when they had the run in the ACC tournament to make the NCAA tournament. I was at three of the five games, and I was there for the championship game when we beat Carolina,
Gosh.
and in here in DC, and it was like one of the greatest moments ever. I was like, this is like, it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's a crazy
And
moment.
when you're serving overseas abroad, you don't get to do that.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? That's one of the gives and takes I was talking about. Like I haven't gotten to do that. I haven't gone to an ACC tournament since, gosh, I was in college, I think.
Good Lord.
But so yeah, it took me 30 years, but now I got to go back and finally do it. And the one year I go back, it's here in my hometown, DC, or, where I'm living now.
Wow.
And we ended up winning and having this magical run.
It's
So
surreal. That's just surreal.
yeah,
Gosh.
it's good stuff.
Well, Patrick, thank you for joining me and for having this conversation with me.
Yeah, absolutely. I
I
really
really
enjoyed it. It was
likewise.
really enjoyed the discussion. You had some really good questions, and hopefully anybody watching or listening got something out of it.
Yeah.
Was able to learn something.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad we did it. Thank you so much.